Hello, everyone. Welcome to our online video series, Reading Hope in Trying Times. Our guest today is Dr. Saundra Dalton-Smith. Saundra is an author, speaker, and board-certified internal medicine physician. She's an international media resource on the mind-body-spirit connection and a top 100 medical expert in good housekeeping doctor secrets. She has been featured in many media outlets, including Women's Day, Redbook, Daystar, MSNBC, Focus on the Family, Psychology Today, Prevention, and is a guest on the Dr. Oz Show. She is the author of Set Free to Live Free and Come Empty, which was winner of the 2016 Golden Scroll Nonfiction Book of the Year and 2016 Illumination Award Gold Medalist. Her newest release is Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity, which includes groundbreaking insight on the 7 types of rest needed to optimize your productivity, increase your overall happiness, and live your best life. Over 50,000 people have discovered their personal rest deficit using her free assessment at restquiz.com. I'm also happy to say that Saundra served as a keynote speaker at our Publishing in Color conference. So it's really great to have you here today with us, Saundra.
Oh, happy to do it, Brian.
So maybe we can start by having you share just some of your thoughts on this whole pandemic that we're going through.
I think I'm always looking at it from both kind of the medical and the spiritual aspect of it. For me, it's just been really different when I look at it from the eyes of a lot of my colleagues who are currently out there and seeing patients and just dealing with the disease directly. Honestly, one of the things that came to mind is just how it's affecting them. And how really they're needing hope in this time, how they're needing to be motivated and encouraged to keep going and to keep showing up and keep being on the front lines and to be hopeful and available to the patients that they're serving.
I think that's one thing, that people have been realizing more than ever before is just empathy for healthcare workers.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they've been underappreciated for a long time. But now everyone realizes, that they're the front lines and, they're having to risk and endure what the rest of us aren't.
Yeah. And what I'm really loving seeing how people are stepping up with their faith in health. One of the things I've been speaking on for a long time and going to conferences and having this conversation with physicians of faith specifically is how to share your faith when you're out there with patients, because it's not taught in medical school. It's real kind of still taboo, whether or not it's something that's appropriate to some degree. Well, if there's anything that's good, that has come out of this. One of the things I think is that it really has opened up that talk of faith and health so that we're not just seeing them as these two kind of ends of the kind of this balance. We're seeing that they can be used together. And so I love hearing about nurses and doctors and, physicians assistants and all of these different people who are now praying with patients, who are, sitting at the bedside, holding hands, holding iPads so people can have conversations with their families that can't be there with them. And, doing these extra steps that are not a part of the job, but it's a part of caring for people and just really just being present.
Well, what an amazing, contribution that they're making to these people's lives in the time of their need. They're playing so many different roles than what maybe that they, had originally intended. And in particular for some of the folks that, are so sick and, none of the relatives can see them or talk to them.
Yeah, I think that's probably the hardest part for everybody involved, the patient, the staff taking care of the patient. Typically when someone's sick, we encourage the family to come in. That's actually part of the healing process is to be surrounded by those people who love you and who know you and who can care for you, not just physically care for you, but can care for your emotional and your mental and psychological health. So, that's one of the strange things about this disease is that it does create a level of isolation that is just foreign to us. It's foreign, not just to those in the hospital, but overall, just this whole sense of, you can't go into your churches. I mean, who's ever not, if you're like me and you grew up in church, you have never not been in church on an Easter Sunday, on a resurrection weekend. It has
Sure.
never happened.
Yeah.
So, it's creating this level of isolation that's just really unusual, just feels unfamiliar to us.
Before we started the recording, you were telling me about one of your colleagues who's relatively young and healthy and contracted the coronavirus. You want to talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, that was very interesting because this is a gentleman who's in his 40s, mid 40s, extremely healthy, very athletic, the kind of person who, goes out on the weekends and does, 10-mile bike rides and runs a couple of miles every day, eats all the green things, the green smoothies, just extraordinarily healthy guy. And I was speaking to him. I hadn't spoken to him in a while. And I was speaking to him yesterday and he made this comment. He's like, I just got over three weeks of the worst illness I'd ever had. He's like, this COVID thing is no joke. And I was like, you got sick? He's like, yeah. He's like, I was, initially when this started, I had this feeling that everybody was over exaggerating. So I wore a mask, but I wasn't really taking full on precautions. And he's like, I caught it. And for 3 weeks, I was basically on my back. I've never been this sick ever. Now he recovered. He's back at work, taking full precautions and all of these things now. But what that really helped me to see is that the way this virus is working, it has no respecter of person, so to speak. It doesn't matter if you are completely healthy, you can still catch it. If you have a weakened immune system, you can catch it. I think the good news is that that most people do recover from it. That is the good news. But you do have to really be mindful of letting your body go through the process of healing. And I loved one of the things he shared with me. He was like, I got tested, found out I was positive. The only thing anybody could tell me to do was go home and rest. And so he's like, I went home. I locked myself in the one bed, our guest bedroom, so I wouldn't contaminate the rest of my family. Basically had people bring stuff to him so that he didn't have to leave that room for a couple of weeks, or a couple of days rather, till his fever broke. Actually, I think he said it was like 10 days before the fevers completely went away. But kind of living out of this room and the adjacent bathroom. And I thought it was really interesting because, nobody else in his family got sick, which is a miracle, honestly, as contagious as this particular disease is. But I think a part of that was because they were doing some proactive things in their house, like wearing the mask when they went upstairs to deliver the meals, spraying the hall, like coming and going with Lysol, to try to kill anything that may have been airborne. His wife was actively cleaning the bathroom. Nobody else was using that bathroom, but she was actively keeping it clean and to sanitize so that, if one of the kids happened to wander up there, or went there, that there was as much protection going on as possible. They were using paper plates. This is something we do in the hospital when we have a patient in isolation. We use those styrofoam containers, because we can toss it. We don't have to
Sure.
wash it and contaminate more, so they were using the plastic forks and paper plates. So I thought, it was really interesting because as a healthcare provider, he knew some of these things that we do in a hospital type practice when we have that type of patient. And he basically emulated that at home. And
Wow.
so, I
Sound like
think
it
that's
really paid
great.
off.
It really does. And I think that's the thing that, that would be helpful for a lot of people if you have someone in your house or if you become ill, that there are just some really, simple things that you can do just to try to help protect you from spreading it to the people you love and to protect them from catching it while taking care of you.
I know, at least personally, it's just so difficult to get away from your habits.
Hmm.
When I go outside to get, a box that's been delivered, okay, I should be wearing my gloves. I should be protecting about, the fact that virus could be on the cardboard for a few
Yeah.
days, and so, but I'll forget, I'll just go out and
Mhm.
grab it. And then, oh yeah, I need to wash my hands, I mean, which, but, just breaking, the habits that are so ingrained for each of us is really such a tough thing. But, thank goodness that he had the training, the background to keep the rest of his family safe.
Yeah, and you're right. I think that's one of there's so many new components to COVID-19 that are unlike some of the other viruses that, we've dealt with in healthcare. I think that's one of the big things is just the lifespan of the virus outside of a host. How long it can stay active on cardboard and plastics and fabrics. I think that's the part that gets a little tricky because, like you said, we're not familiar with that. That's not something we've ever really had to deal with before. So I find myself so kind of almost doing the same thing. The doorbell rings, UPS drops something off. I'm yelling at my kids, don't get the don't go through the door, don't get the door.
Yeah,
I want to spray it down and I want to wipe it down and all these things. Even I was talking to a friend, just getting takeout because now you can get it at least delivered to your home when you want something different than what you're cooking. And I was telling her, I was like, well, once it's delivered, it takes me 20 minutes to wipe all the boxes down. And she was like, I never thought to wipe the boxes down that came in from takeout.
Sure. A lot of it's cardboard, and I mean,
so yeah, it's requiring us to really think outside the box on where could the virus still be alive. And, the thing I think that's really interesting to me is that just like with every virus right now, because it's so new, our bodies aren't familiar with it yet. I mean, this is how science works. It's like the more you're exposed to something, the less it affects you, unless it mutates. That's out there too. But typically, the more you're exposed to things, the less it starts affecting you. That's why over time, the flu became kind of less of this big deal. The flu is still our deadliest virus that we've ever experienced. But because we've seen it so many times, we get to a point where our body starts adjusting to it. You get it, you get sick for a few days, you get over it, you get well. And eventually we will get there with COVID, but it's just so new that our immune system doesn't know what to do with it yet. So it's still kind of got to figure out how to respond. And it's during that time that it's, fighting back that it really figures that out. And you end up coming back stronger after the fact.
Well, that's certainly good news. In our earlier conversation too, you seem pretty confident that we'll come up with some type of a vaccine for this.
Yes. There's already a vaccine prototype that's out there. I have one of my high school friends actually is in the prototype. He posts every day about what his temperature and, what his numbers are doing and how he's feeling and reports back and forth about how his visits are going at the hospital. He's up in Seattle, where the initial epicenter kind of broke out up in Washington. And so they have a vaccine that they're testing right now on human subjects. So I'm very hopeful that they'll be able to get something out into the market sooner than later, particularly since, his take is that he hasn't had any side effects whatsoever. So if that's great news. So I'm hopeful that, the FDA and all the medical powers that be that have to approve this going kind of into mass testing will do so, because they start with a small cohort and, then they do a larger cohort and then they kind of go out, to masses. I think this, because of how hard this hit the world, they're not going to go through all of the different.
Yeah, they'll accelerate it.
Yeah, they're not going to jump through all those hoops like they normally would. They're going to need to push this forward a little bit faster. Now, what does that mean for the general population? Because a lot of people don't like taking the flu vaccine because, it leaves your arms sore, you're hurting for like a day. There's side effects sometimes that come with taking some of these vaccines. But I think at this point, it's going to be a very similar situation. If you have a healthy immune system, then most vaccines, when they get into a healthy immune system, are not, if it's not a live vaccine, it can't give you the virus. I think that's where people get confused. They think, well, I took the flu shot and I got the flu. That's medically not even possible. It's not a live virus. It's not even active. It's a dead virus they're giving you just to activate your system. So when you're getting that shot, it's not live. Unlike the shingles vaccine, which is a live vaccine. So you can get the shingles vaccine and end up with shingles if you haven't already been exposed and don't already have the antibodies to combat the virus.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's the thing. I think they're going to really have to do a lot of education on that, because we do have both types. live viruses and inactive viruses, people are going to need to have some level of comfort that this is not going to give them COVID, if they take it.
Sure, sure. No, I think that kind of communication is going to be really important.
Yes, yes.
So one of the things we've been discussing in these, interviews is just kind of like how God has supported us, been with us in challenging times in the past, and how, we can draw upon that now. So is there anything along those lines that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, well, I think God is, there's so many different, situations I can think about in my life where I just feel like God has shown up in what seems like just impossible situations. I think probably the one that's constantly comes to mind when I think about God kind of taking me through something I thought I couldn't get over would probably be all the way back to childhood. I remember I grew up raised by my great grandmother because my mother died soon after childbirth. So I've always had this very weird feeling with death and life and just really that whole concept. And so I think that's probably why I even went into medicine in the first place, because I was so drawn to life and death and just how all of these things work together. And I think for me, one thing that I really saw how God has helped me in that is that to realize that God is good all the time. God is always a healer. He's always capable of healing. And I had to get to a place in my heart where I understood that sometimes he heals on this side of heaven and sometimes he heals on the other side of heaven, but he's still the healer on both sides. And so that helped me as a child growing up, because I always felt like, God, why didn't you heal my mother when she was in that hospital? I when I got that kind of real revelation in my heart that God is good, point, period. There's no additional needed added after that. He's good, period. And he's still a healer, period. But the healing I don't get to choose where the healing takes place. And I just have to trust that healing happens either on this side or in heaven. And so it's the same thing I take with me when I go into my medical practice. I'm an internist, so I'm in the ICU a lot, in the ER. You see hard things that don't make sense. I still know that God is a healer, whether it is not my choice if he heals on this side or in heaven. And I think that's something that has helped me now looking at the situation with COVID, with the number of people who have lost their lives from this disease. My prayer, my hope is that the word is getting out about Jesus and about his love and about him as coming to be a savior for us and giving us access to be able to live a redeemed life and to be in heaven. Because I think that is the biggest hope, and that is where I find the biggest comfort.
Well, hope is a word that, I think everyone's using, more and more, to describe the situation that we're in on multiple dimensions. So thank you for that. What about any of the books that you've written, or, I'm kind of intrigued by this rest quiz. I mean, some of us are impacted through this pandemic in that we're already, forced rest, so to speak, but others are, overwhelmed, because of, their particular life situations and not getting rest.
Yeah.
So, what suggestions do you have based on your experience, your books, that are tools that can help people now?
Well, that's interesting because in March of this year, right when COVID was kind of hitting hard across the world, there was a study done about how this situation, this pandemic, was affecting people's ability to sleep. And it came back that out of, I think it was about 50,000 or so, maybe 100,000 people that had been interviewed, that 75% of them were saying that they felt like their sleep quality had decreased, that they weren't sleeping as well. Some said they felt anxious. Others just felt like they were, they just were restless. They just couldn't get comfortable to go to sleep. And so I think that has been very interesting because during that time, you said, you mentioned that 50,000 people have taken the rest quiz. Now 100,000 people
Oh
have
my
taken the
goodness.
rest quiz because I
Wow.
think what's happened is there's a lot of people who are realizing that just being home is not restful. Many of us, I think we had always kind of made these jokes that, oh, it'd be great if I could be home all day and work from home and, do all these things from home. And now that we're kind of forced to do it, we're seeing that just being home in itself is not restful. And so in my book, Sacred Rest, Recover Your Life, Renew Your Energy, Restore Your Sanity, that's what my research is on. It's
Hmm.
on the 7 types of rest and how sleep alone can't solve your fatigue if you have a rest deficit in one of the other types of rest.
Wow.
So, sleep being physical, a physical type of rest. And then you also have the mental, the spiritual, the emotional, social, sensory, and creative types of rest. So I think a lot of people are starting to realize that I need rest in other areas. And, just trying to get sleep is not helping my chronic fatigue.
Wow. That's really great. Well, I hope more people can take advantage of it. I'm glad so many people have already.
Yeah, it's a free assessment at restquiz.com. And I think it's helpful just to be able to identify maybe why you're tired. I always say if you go to bed tired and you wake up as tired as you were when you went to bed, then sleep probably wasn't the answer, particularly if you felt like you got 6, 7, 8, you weren't down for just 2 hours. You actually stayed in the bed and felt like you got fairly decent sleep, but it didn't restore you, then something else is needing rest in your life. And that's, I think, the mindset shift is that rest should really equal restoration. When you have a time of rest, you should leave that time of rest feeling restored in some way. And if you're not feeling restored, then it probably wasn't true rest. Watching Netflix, probably not real rest. So,
Well, everyone's stress level, I think, is higher, over the last couple of months in various ways for different reasons. And so I think that's pretty insightful, pretty helpful for people to understand the different types of rest that we're talking about.
yeah, I'm hopeful that people will really kind of put that into action. That's the biggest part of the book. We go over some things to do to actually make it applicable so they can get the work done. I think sometimes knowing something and being able to apply it to your life are two different things. And so for this to really be effective, I think it's important for people to actually be able to put it into use.
Sure, sure. Now you had another book, Come Empty,
Mhm.
that it sounded like had some relevance to where we're at today too.
Yes, come empty. It's pour out life's hurt, receive God's healing love. I think it's great for this season right now, and I see a lot of people are using it as a devotional. It's used most often as a devotional along the times of Lent, leading into Passover and Easter. So I think really interesting that this kind of hit during that time because the book basically talks about not having the answers, having to trust God with your fears and your insecurities and your doubts, and feeling that unstable feeling of not knowing what's next, coming empty without the answers, without knowing where to turn at that intersection. And I feel like that's where a lot of people probably are right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So Saundra, I want to thank you for joining us because of the fact that you've got such expertise in both faith and medicine and how that combination is so important right now. I think this has really been helpful for people. So thank you very much for sharing all of your wisdom and your knowledge and your expertise.
Oh, my pleasure.
Well, thanks again, and we'll be back together again soon.